So what if the steam engine? What if it wasn't just a machine? I mean, we all know it pumped water and powered trains, but what if it was a physical manifestation of a very specific kind masculine logic?
A logic that he argues literally saved civilization from starvation.
Exactly. And here's the kicker, the part that's going to make you rethink everything you see on the news. What if the modern world is actively, right now, dismantling the very mindset that built it?
It's a provocative premise, to say the least. We're used to thinking of the Industrial Revolution as this timeline of inventions. James Watt, the spinning jenny, coal mines.
Right, the stuff from the textbooks.
But today's source argues it wasn't just about technology. It was, in his words, a gendered conquest of nature, a triumph of risk, aggression, and hierarchy that we are now apologizing for.
To our own detriment, he would say. We are diving deep into a book today that is absolutely going to ruffle some feathers. It might actually pluck them right off.
It might.
It's called Enlightenment Engineering, Steam Power Revolution in England by Conrad Riker. And let me tell you, this is not the history they taught you in school. Riker frames this as a red-pilled manifesto.
He really does. He's taking a blowtorch to what he calls the gynocentric silence of modern history.
Absolutely. His whole thesis is that this industrial leap was driven by these distinctively male traits. Aristotelian logic, a high tolerance for risk, a drive for dominion.
And he argues that modern institutions, from feminism to DEI, even Marxism, are basically acting as entropy. They're cooling down the engine that keeps us all alive.
Before we even get the boiler going on this, I have to say, if you want the raw, unfiltered truth we're talking about today, the stuff that usually gets left out, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now. Buy Conrad Riker's Enlightenment Engineering. If you are tired of the sanitized version of history, this ebook is your manual. Also, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button for this deep dive right now. You don't want to miss these kinds of discussions.
And Riker covers a tremendous amount of ground. We're going to get into what he calls the engine ethics of James Watt, his full-throated defense of the robber barons.
Oh, yeah?
And a take on the Luddites that I guarantee you haven't heard before. And we'll look at the data he presents, linking the decline of this steam power culture to what he sees as modern societal collapse.
So let's set the scene. Transport yourself back to 1775, Birmingham, England, the Soho Manufactory. Riker describes Matthew Bolton's factory, and he's not painting this grim, sooty sweatshop picture.
No, not at all. He calls it a temple of industry.
It's temple of industry.
Right. And this is crucial to his worldview. He says we've been conditioned to see these places as sites of oppression. But for the men then, this was a cathedral of meritocracy. He highlights the partnership between Bolton and Watt.
And they didn't run a charity. It was all based on this engine royalty system.
Yes.
I loved this detail. Explain how that worked, because it sounds totally alien today.
Well, today we get salaries, hourly wages, maybe bonus. Bolton and Watt's system was ruthless. Pay was tied directly to horsepower and risk.
So pure performance.
Through performance. If the engine worked and saved a mine owner money on coal, they got a cut. If it failed, they got nothing.
No participation trophies in 1775.
Exactly. And Riker contrasts this with modern corporate culture. He brings up Boeing as his big contemporary example. He argues that in 2022, their board was prioritizing equity initiatives over engineering rigor.
While laying off engineers, right.
At the same time. In Riker's view, Bolton's system created human flourishing through pressure like a boiler. Whereas the modern approach, focusing on inclusion over competence, literally causes planes to crash.
He does not pull any punches. And speaking of competence, he drops this statistic from the UK Intellectual Property Office archives that it stopped me in my tracks. 98% of British patents during the steam revolution filed by men.
That is a massive number. And this is where his red-pilled angle really comes into focus. He anticipates the modern reaction, which is to say, well, obviously women were oppressed.
Right, they were excluded.
Riker rejects that explanation entirely.
He calls it biological specialization, doesn't he?
Yes. He cites neurological studies, which are controversial, I should add, suggesting a male predisposition for system building, for spatial reasoning. He's saying the Industrial Revolution wasn't just men keeping women out. It was a product of the male brain's obsession with things and forces.
Instead of people and feelings.
Exactly. He argues if you're obsessed with social harmony, you don't build a steam engine. You build a steam engine by being obsessed with friction and heat.
He uses this story about James Watt and his wife, Margaret, to illustrate it. I had no idea about this. Apparently, she burned his designs.
Twice, according to the source. Riker quotes Watt's diary, where he writes, Again, sacrifice my improvements to her domestic idolatry.
Domestic idolatry. Wow.
And Riker uses this as a fundamental conflict. It's not just a marital stab. It's the clash between the feminine desire for safety, for cleanliness and ritual, versus the masculine drive for risk, mess, and creation.
So the mess of the papers was a threat to her domain, but it was essential for his.
Precisely. He argues that if Watt had listened, we wouldn't have the separate condenser, and by extension, we wouldn't have the modern world. He sees it as this eternal struggle between the nest and the frontier.
That brings us to the iron law segment of the book. This is where he tries to reframe our whole understanding of the factory system. We think of child labor, 14-hour days, as pure evil. Riker says, not so fast.
He takes a very controversial stance here, and I want to be clear about his argument. He uses Arkwright's Cromford Mill as his case study.
Yeah.
He points out that before the mills, children were not playing in gardens,
No, they were in farm fields.
hauling manure for subsistence wages, often starving. Riker argues the factory was actually liberation from subsistence farming.
That's a heavy claim. Does he have data for that?
He claims that wages in the mills doubled compared to farm work. But the key statistic he uses, and this is the one that really challenges the narrative, is that orphan mortality actually dropped in the factory towns compared to the parish workhouses.
So the factory, as brutal as it was, saved lives by providing resources.
That's his argument. He called it masculine pragmatism. You accept a level of suffering and risk to build a system that pulls everyone out of starvation. Which brings him to the Luddites,
Oh man, the Luddites. I always pictured them as these noble artisans fighting for their craft.
the little guy against the machine.
Yeah, Riker calls them jealous husbands.
It's a complete inversion of the narrative. He claims the frame breakers weren't protesting the quality of the cloth or the loss of their art.
What were they angry about then?
They were angry that the factories allowed women to earn independent wages for the first time.
Wait, so smashing the machines? It was about controlling women.
According to Riker, yes. He cites police records suggesting the riots were often fueled by men who felt their status as the sole provider was threatened. He even claims some riots were funded by gentry wives, protecting their hobbies from industrial competition.
So they were the first social justice warriors, in his view.
That's the term he uses, trying to stop progress to protect their own ego. He connects this whole philosophy of risk to safety, too, with the Davy lamp story.
I've never heard this version of it.
It's a fascinating, if grim, example. The Davy lamp was designed to prevent explosions in coal mines by shielding the flame. But Riker notes that overseers would often just remove the safety gauze.
To get a brighter light, right. And most people would say, see, greedy capitalists endangering workers.
Riker sees it differently. He says the brighter light increased production, which meant more pay for the miners. He frames it as a calculated risk, masculine pragmatism versus modern safetyism,
He thinks they understood the risks.
and that they were willing to skirt safety for output, because that output kept the empire alive. He contrasts this with modern OSHA regulations, which he claims stifle male productivity by prioritizing absolute safety over results.
He even brings thermodynamics into it. Carnot's principle. This is where it gets really philosophical.
This is one of his big metaphors.
Okay.
Sadi Carnot proved that an engine needs a temperature differential heat and cold to work. You need that gap.
Okay.
Riker applies this to society. He argues that civilization needs the temperature differential between male ambition, which is the heat, and female nurturing, the cold.
So if everyone is the same, the engine just stops.
Exactly. His claim is that modern progressivism acts like entropy. By trying to make everyone the same, flattening gender roles, equalizing outcomes, we're creating a lukewarm society where no work can be done. He calls it social heat death.
That's a heavy metaphor. Okay, so how does he think this heat death is happening right now? Segment 3 is all about the capture of institutions.
Right. He argues the legacy of Steen is being actively dismantled. He points to Sweden as his primary warning. He critiques their feminist foreign policy from 2014 to 2022.
What was the result of that, according to him?
He claims it led to a collapse in their arms exports because they were prioritizing gender perspectives and dialogue over strategic defense.
And he connects that with crime, right?
He does. He points to the rise in grenade attacks and gang violence in Swedish cities during that same period. He contrasts that with Poland, which he argues maintained a male-led traditional defense posture, boosted spending, and maintained order.
So he's drawing a direct line. Patriarchal values lead to survival. Matriarchal values lead to decline.
That's his argument. He does the same thing with education. He gets really specific about why boys are struggling in school.
It's not just video games, in his view.
No, he ties it to the removal of shop classes, vocational training, hands-on learning. He cites Detroit, noting that when vocational training was cut, male dropout rates just skyrocketed.
Because the system became feminized.
Yes. Sitting still, verbalizing feelings, group work, which he argues is antithetical to the masculine neurological predisposition for doing, for building, for competing. He links this directly to the drop in boys' literacy.
And he uses that term, NPC.
Non-player character. Yeah, it's a gamer term, but he uses it sociologically to describe modern activists. He looks at the Berkeley riots in 2017 and describes the protesters not as individuals with rational grievances, but as a hive mind suffering from emotional contagion.
Meaning they aren't thinking for themselves.
Meaning they lack what he calls Aristotelian logic, the ability to debate facts. Instead, they operate on pure emotion and group signaling. He sees this as the exact opposite of the mindset that built the steam engine. The engine doesn't care about your feelings, it cares about pressure.
It's a harsh critique, but he goes even deeper into the soul of this machinery. He has a whole section on religion called Protestant power.
This is where he connects the spirit of capitalism to the spirit of steam. He argues that the Protestant work ethic, Calvinism, Wesleyanism, turned factories into anti-churches. Efficiency wasn't just about money, it was about salvation.
And he contrasts this with Catholic Europe.
Sharply. He argues Catholic regions stagnated because of feast days, holidays, and ritualism. He sees the Protestant Reformation as necessary because it valued production over ritual. But here's the pivot. He takes this religious fervor for order and applies it to the modern war on fathers.
This part of the book was intense. He talks about family courts as a gynocentric conspiracy.
He provides a lot of data. He cites that 90% of custody battles are won by mothers. He really attacked the Duluth model of domestic violence intervention.
Can you explain the Duluth model for listeners?
Sure. It's a framework used by law enforcement that basically posits domestic violence is a result of patriarchal power. Riker argues this model presumes male guilt by default.
It assumes the man is the aggressor.
Yes. Regardless of the specific facts, Riker links this legal bias directly to the rise of fatherless homes.
And he connects fatherlessness to the collapse of the engine.
Yes. He uses Detroit's crime stats again. Riker's point is that the Industrial Revolution was built by patriarchs. The deal was, men take the risk, do the hard work, and in exchange, they lead the family. If you remove the father, you break the boiler of society.
You remove the structure. He brings it back to biology again, too, doesn't he? Testosterone.
He does. He asserts that high testosterone is inextricably linked to pattern production and system building. He argues that when society suppresses toxic masculinity, aggression, competitiveness, it is actually suppressing the biological drive that builds civilization.
He sees the steam engine as a testosterone-fueled invention.
An intervention in history, yeah. A low testosterone society, in his view, cannot maintain the infrastructure a high testosterone society built.
So if the West is failing, what about the rest of the world? He does a global comparison.
He looks at why the Industrial Revolution happened in Britain and not China or India or the Ottoman Empire. They all had smart people, resources. But Riker argues they prioritized bureaucracy or mysticism over the cold, hard numbers and property rights of the West.
The West won because it embraced the iron law of reality.
It didn't care about social harmony. It cared about truth and production.
So what's the solution? What does Riker want us to do? He talks about something called the Phoenix Forge.
He's calling for a hard reset. He mentions patriarchal reboot clubs, citing examples in places like Warsaw. These aren't just social clubs. They're spaces where men enforce property rights, reject emotional governance, and retrain themselves in Aristotelian logic.
It sounds like he wants to rebuild a men's hut.
Effectively, yes. He wants a return to a society that values competence and force over feelings and safety. He wants men to arm themselves with logic and the willingness to say no to the consensus.
It's a call to restart the engine, basically.
Exactly. He believes the engine has stopped because we've let the pressure drop. We're worried about the boiler exploding, so we turned off the fire. Riker wants to shovel the coal back in, even if it burns.
This book, Enlightenment Engineering, is definitely not for the faint of heart. Riker is essentially saying that the modern world was built by men who understood force, friction, and logic, and we are losing that inheritance to a culture of grievance.
He leaves us with that final red pill thought. Civilization is a steam engine. It requires pressure. It requires heat. If we prioritize safety, comfort, and entropy, the engine stops. And if the engine stops, we don't just lose our iPhones, we starve.
That is a thought that will stick with you. Look, we've covered the main beats, but Riker goes into so much more detail. Trust me, you need to read the full text to get the full impact. So go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and buy Enlightenment Engineering, Steam Power Revolution in England by Conrad Riker.
And for the ongoing discussion, Riker suggests following him at Conrad Riker on Substack. That's where he engages with the community.
Absolutely. Do that. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our deep dive channel right here. We'll be back with more investigations that other shows are too afraid to touch. Are you ready to restart the boiler? Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.